I'm going to show you guys some really fascinating quotes that I found from all different traditions that talk about different levels of non-attachment and how it can just help to relieve your suffering and help you to live a happier life. And so again, these are not trying to make y'all believe anything or anything, but just to be a resource for information that I think is very fascinating and I think also very helpful for me and might be helpful for you. So, okay, peace family. My name is Christina Victoria, and today I wanted to talk about non-attachment. Non-attachment. Now, if you've been following my series about what is the nature of this place that we call Earth, what is the solution to our predicament of suffering, I've gone into the Christian perspective, I've gone into some Eastern perspectives, and one of the things I wanted to talk about that I didn't touch on yesterday is non-attachment, which is said to be, many different philosophies actually seem to agree on this, that non-attachment is the solution or one of the solutions to our suffering. And so before we get into this, as always, I love you guys so much. Wishing you abundant life, love, joy, peace, and prosperity, family, but not only to you, to your loved ones, to your communities, and even to your stinky butt enemies, because their butts stink, but not ours. No, we're all equal. And so with that, let's get into this one. So non-attachment. What is non-attachment? First of all, non-attachment is simply not being committed to the outcome of things, okay? Not being committed to the outcome. It's not the same thing as detachment. And I had a really great conversation with my mother, who is my greatest spiritual teacher, so I have to give her props in this video because I really can't take credit for a lot of these things. She's really freed my mind in a certain way to even be able to explore these topics. And so she's a pastor, by the way. She's a very amazing person. So we're going to talk about her. But she's freed my mind to not beat me over the head like, you have to believe this, right? It's like, I'm going to allow you to explore freely and then live a life in such a way that you might want to emulate me, right? And explore, why I do certain practices. My mom's been meditating for years, you know what I'm saying? And I never understood it until I was much older. So I just have to give props to her. I call her mommy, but her name is Reverend Clara. So props to Reverend Clara. So we had a very fascinating conversation about non-attachment, and she really wanted to make sure that I understood. And this isn't about trying to make y'all believe anything, force y'all to think anything, any kind of way. This is simply an exercise of free thought, okay? Free thought. And so, non-attachment, she told me, is different than detachment, okay? Detachment would be like, I just don't care. I don't care about anything. Nothing matters. I don't care. I don't care about you. I don't love anybody. That's what detachment would be. Non-attachment is different than that. Non-attachment means that I'm going to give my all to whatever it is that I care about. If I love you, I'm going to give you all my love. If I, want to do something good for somebody, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. But what non-attachment says is that I'm not going to be committed to the outcome. So if I decide that I love you and I want to give you love, if you decide that you don't want to love me back, I have to accept that. You know what I mean? That's non-attachment. Or if I'm in a relationship and, things go in a different direction than what I expected, then there's a level of non-attachment that says, I did my best. You have to accept kind of what is, as opposed to being attached to what you thought it was going to be. And there's so many different levels of this. I even think about, politics and things like that, where we might have a will, a desire, our will, right? That we want it to be this way. I want this person to win. I want that person to lose, right? But exercising non-attachment would be, I'm going to work my hardest for this particular candidate because they're aligned with my values, but I'm not going to be attached to the outcome, right? The outcome is what it is. If you are a believer, a Christian, you might say that, non-attachment would be connected to surrender to the will of God. Surrender to the will of God. And I think Muslims also believe in surrender to the will of God, which would say, like, if you think about when we asked Jesus how to pray, right? And he said, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. You are holy. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so Jesus told us to pray, not our will, right? You're not supposed to pray, Lord, give me this. Lord, give me that. Give me this. Give me that, right? What Jesus said to pray is, God, you are holy. Your kingdom come, your will be done. And that's it. And that's it. It's surrendering. And I wanted to explore, not just the Christian perspective. I'm going to get into a little bit more about Jesus and what he said about this in a minute. But I also wanted to talk about Eastern perspectives, because I feel like traditionally, a lot of times when we think about non-attachment, the phrase, we think about Buddhism. And I'm going to show you guys some really fascinating quotes that I found from all different traditions that talk about different levels of non-attachment and how it can just help to relieve your suffering and help you to live a happier life. And so again, these are not trying to make y'all believe anything or anything, but just to be a resource for information that I think is very fascinating, and I think also very helpful for me and might be helpful for you. So let's go into some of these quotes that I thought were just really, really good. So this is in a Zen saying. So we're going to start with Buddhism. A Zen saying, it says, "Consider the trees, which allow the birds to perch and fly away without ever inviting them to stay or desiring them to depart. If your heart can be like this, you will be near to the way." And it's interesting when you think about Buddhism, they talk about the way, right? The way. And it's so fascinating. I love looking at these parallels between faith practices because, I still identify as a practicing Christian, but if you think about Christianity, when right after Jesus, died, resurrected, and then the Christians became, all over, they started going crazy, like not crazy, but they were excited, right? And they were telling everyone and just going everywhere talking about it. Before they were called Christians, it was called the way. The path of Christianity, the path of following Jesus was just called the way before it had a real name. And I just think that's very fascinating. So he says that, if you can just be and allow people to come into your life for whatever season, allow them to leave for whatever season, and enjoy when they're there. When the bird is there, you're like, wow, this bird is so beautiful. And then when it goes away, it's like, wow, thank you for being here. And that's it, And Buddha said the root of suffering is attachment. And so how do you root out suffering is by non-attachment. In Hinduism, it says this is from the Bhagavad Gita. "You have the right to work, but never to the fruit of the work. You should never engage in action for the sake of reward, nor should you long for inaction. Perform work in this world without selfish attachments and alike in success and defeat." So perform the work, do it to the best of your ability, but without attachment. And this in this particular context calls the attachment selfishness. It's that you're doing something. Are you doing something because it's right? Are you doing something because it's actually you want to do a good job, or are you doing something because you want the praise, that you want the rewards, you want the promotion, right? And I think that's really interesting to think about. What is my motive, my true motive for doing this? Lao Tzu in Taoism says, "Act without expectation." Act without expectation. Okay, Tao Te Ching. "Giving birth and nourishing, having without possessing, acting with no expectations, leading and not trying to control. This is the supreme virtue." I think that's so fascinating. If you think about, I think about my mother, giving birth and nourishing, having without possessing. It's an idea that, I've given birth to you, but I don't own you. I might be your mother, but I'm giving you the freedom and the space to explore on your own. I'm giving you information to make good decisions, but you have that freedom because I don't own you. And I think that the truest level of love, right, is the idea that I can let something go. And if it wants to come back to me, then it really loves me, right? I'm not going to force it to be here. And the idea of being a leader, I think a lot of this society is very focused on control. It's like, you have to believe what we believe. You're either on this side, this team, or you're on that side, that team. And there's this insistence that, I know the way and that you have to go my way. And I feel like a lot of leaders have that kind of energy that they know it all and that they found the actual absolute truth and they're the only ones that know it. And so you have to follow it. But it's fascinating when you think of the idea of leadership that's not forcing everyone to do a certain thing, but that is simply leading it's like, I'm not going to even tell you how to do it. I'm just going to do it the way that I think is right. And if you want to emulate me, then cool. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm not going to make you emulate me. I'm not going to ask you to subscribe. I'm not going to force you to like. No, if you feel that this was beneficial, do that. But it's that free will that I think is so much more powerful, and it's so much more meaningful when you have leadership that is allowing people to come freely as opposed to like forcing, you know? And so I found another one that's actually from Islam. It says, detachment is not that you should own nothing, but that nothing should own you. And my dad used to actually say something like that. He was like, he always used to say, just like, don't let your possessions consume you, you know, don't be owned by the things that you have. My dad was not a Muslim, but I think this is fascinating because these are universal principles that say, you know, the idea of being free means that I'm not owned by anything. I'm not owned by any object. I'm not owned by any person, you know? And so, yeah. So let's go into Jesus, because I like comparing both Eastern and Western traditions and giving people information. You know, if you want to be a Christian, cool, you know, I'm not going to force it on y'all, but I think it is interesting to see how people across the world have thought about the same topic. Now, you know, the word non-attachment doesn't show up in the Bible necessarily, but the idea, the concepts of non-attachment do show up, and Jesus does talk about this. And so there's a story that I thought was really powerful that I wanted to share with you all. That is from the book of Matthew. It's Matthew 19. Starts at verse 16, and this is the story called Jesus Counsels the Rich Young Ruler. And so I'm just going to read you all the story. It's pretty short, okay? It goes, now behold, one came and said to him, good teacher, what good thing shall I do that I may have eternal life? And he said to him, why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is God. But if you want to enter into life, keep the commandments. He said to him, which ones? Jesus said, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, honor your father and your mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The young man said to him, all these things I have kept from my youth. What do I still lack? Jesus said to him, if you want to be perfect, go, sell what you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And come, follow me. But when the young man heard that saying, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. Then Jesus said to his disciples, assuredly I say to you that it is hard for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. Again I say to you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. So, you know, it's interesting because the idea that it's not necessarily that the possessions are evil, but it's our attachment to them that is evil, right? Or that is bad. And so this young man is saying, you know, he's like, I've done all these things. I'm keeping the commandments. I'm not committing any willful sin that I can think of, you know, and that attachment was still there, right? That attachment to thinking about, wow, you know, I have this big house, or I have these cars, or I've spent so much money on these paintings. You know, how can you tell me that I need to get rid of them, you know? And I see, especially as of, you know, nowadays, consumer culture, consumerism has really kind of taken over society, you know, where we're convinced really by capitalism, and I'm not anti-capitalism, but I mean, you know, like convinced us that you need the newest thing, and it's really just these corporations who want to make more money, and so they have to do a little psyop on us to make us feel like we need these things that we don't necessarily need. And so I think it's fascinating to think about non-attachment in so many different ways. Non-attachment to people, non-attachment to objects, non-attachment to outcomes. And what does it mean to live a life of non-attachment? You know, I've even been thinking about these YouTube videos. And again, my mom has been so encouraging because before I even started making these, I've had so many conversations with her. Like, I'm afraid of saying some of these things because I don't want people to call me blasphemous, or I don't want my Christian friends to be like, yo, Christina, you're not supposed to talk about that. Or, you know, all these things, these thoughts that go in your head about like, what are people going to think about me for saying these things? Are people going to judge me for speaking my truth or for exploring different traditions? Are people going to say bad things about me for whatever it is? And there's a point where it's like, you have to kind of, I'm not saying not care about anything, right? But there's a point where you have to be non-attached. It's like, okay, these are the things that are on my mind. These are the things I've been reading and thinking about and talking about with some of my friends. And I want to make a video about it. And so that's what I'm going to do. And there's a point where it's like, I have to be non-attached to what the outcome is. It doesn't matter how many people watch it. It doesn't matter if y'all like on it. It doesn't matter if you subscribe. What matters is that I'm being true to myself. I'm doing what I think makes the most sense and is right in this very moment. And that's enough. That's enough. And I can't tell you how free I feel. I've been making videos I think I started making videos at the end of last year and have been kind of playing around with what I want to talk about. And it's taken a while to get to this place of just speaking as authentically as possible, you know? And it's amazing how freeing it is to just speak my truth, to not worry about what I should say. What is the right thing to say? What is the Christian Orthodox thing to say? You know, sometimes that can actually be limiting to us and to our understanding, because when you're trying to focus so much on orthodoxy or focus so much on like what, you know, everyone is going to think, you kind of, at least me, can fall into this level of perfectionism or like overthinking and then even stagnation, because you're like, you're never going to please everyone. It's not possible. It's not possible. Like my mom was even saying to me, she was like, both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, 50% of the people don't like them. And yet one of them is going to be president. And so it's like, you have to at some point accept that like, there's going to be a percentage of people who will never get you, who will never like you, who will never understand. And you have to be fine with that on some level. It's not about not caring about them or not caring, but it's about just accepting that, you know, you have to kind of stand in who you are. And I have the right to be who I am, just as you have the right to be who you are. And you and I are going to be different in a lot of ways, but it doesn't make either of us less valuable. And if you were to make a video and totally disagree with me and that's your truth, that's fine too. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to be threatened by people disagreeing with you. You don't have to be threatened by people not liking you, because you're entitled to simply exist as you are. And I think that's just such a profound idea, and it's so exciting. I keep talking about my mom. I was talking about her in my last video too, because she's just really been a very good mother to me in a very particular way, because I feel like she has given me a lot of structure in some ways, but also a lot of freedom in other ways to grow and explore the world and to just be myself. And I see a lot of people struggle with just being themselves, and the idea of being given permission to just be yourself and not be attached to what people think about you is just so profoundly freeing. And so the last part I wanted to talk about before I wrap up is really about surrender to the will of God. I touched on this already with, you know, the Lord's Prayer, but I really wanted to talk about just this for a moment, about what does it really mean to surrender to God, to surrender to the will of God. And if you're not necessarily Christian, you know, I know some of y'all might be Buddhist or whatever, what does it mean to surrender to your life? I've heard people say it that way, surrender to your life. Find a place of acceptance of your life, you know, that my life doesn't have to look like your life, you know, your life doesn't have to look like my life. I see certain people like on, you know, YouTube and different politicians, and they'll kind of make fun of people who live a different lifestyle than them, you know? And I always feel like that comes from a place of insecurity, because if you're really happy with your life, who cares what other people are doing, you know? But I think we can teach people what we think is best, but to make fun of someone because they live their life differently than you doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, you know? And I think that, you know, when I think about God, because I do believe in God, think about how much free will God has given us. You know, God has never, you know, God has given us resources. I believe that, you know, we have text that God has inspired so that we would have information. But God doesn't beat us over the head with anything, right? God isn't like, you have to do this. You have to be a Christian. God gives you total free will to choose. Do you want to do this or do you want to do that? God is not controlling at all, you know? God gives us total free will and choice. And I think that's so beautiful. And when I think about surrendering to God, surrendering to my life, surrendering to God's will, there's an element of non-attachment that says, I might want this to happen. I might want this person to be president. I might want, to have this job, or I might want to be with this person, whatever it is, I might want to win the lottery. I might pray for certain things, but it's like I submit my prayer and then let it go. And there's an element of like, I'm going to pray for this because this is what's on my heart. This might be my desire or my need. And then there's an element of like, but God's will be done. Like, if what you want for me, God, is better than what I want for myself, or, going to be better for my livelihood or my enlightenment or my journey, then I wish that your will would be done over mine. And I think that's such a fascinating concept. Like, I was really thinking about this like political, arena, and I'm trying not to get too, I'm not going to get into it because people get real triggered. But saying it in such a way that's like, a lot of us get so attached to, this person has to win, that person has to lose. When, non-attachment or surrender to God would really say, God's will be done. God's will be done in everything. God's will be done in this election, I might have a desire for one way or the other, but ultimately I feel like as a Christian, I have to pray that whatever is best will happen. That would mean that the person who wins, the person who God might will to win, may actually be different than the person who I might want to win. But non-acceptance would say that I accept that God's understanding or, omniscience would be bigger than mine and better than mine. And God would know better for me, better than I would, right? Because I'm just in this small space right here. God can see all and understand all and perceive all things. And so perhaps, I can't even say perhaps on this one. Everything else I'll say perhaps, but this one I definitely believe that God knows better than me. And so, again, I'm not saying any of these things is like, y'all have to do this, but I'm really talking out of my own journey, my own path, my own awakenings, my own glimmers of enlightenment that keep going off, right? I don't think there's ever a moment of enlightenment, of true enlightenment. I think we have moments that just keep awakening, and it's beautiful and exciting. And so I've been thinking about, what does it mean to let go of a lot of these attachments that I have to people, places, and things and ideas. And it is very freeing. And to surrender more and more every day to my life, and to surrender more and more to God, as opposed to these things that I want so badly to be. And it feels like the more you hold on to things sometimes, the harder it is to hold them, Like, if you remember like oobleck, like, if you mix cornstarch and water and you pick it up and you try to hold it, and the more you hold it, it'll just kind of squish out of your hands. But if you kind of pick it up kind of in a loose way, it'll kind of hold it. It's very fascinating. And I feel like life is that way. Like, the more you let go, the more things can come to you naturally. And it's not the things that you might necessarily have asked for. It's things that you really need and are good for you and are better, because our understanding is so limited. And I'm just saying, from my perspective, my understanding, I have come to this realization, is so limited that on some level I have to find non-attachment and just ask God, well, what is actually best for me? What is actually best for this election? What is actually best for this country? I might not really know. I might have a desire, but I might not really know. And so this is, again, coming out of my own journey, my own personal reflections, and my own increasing levels of freedom. And I wish that for you as well. I wish that you would be increasingly free, increasingly liberated in whatever way that is for you. I hope that this was helpful. As always, I love you guys so much. I hope you have a miraculous and beautiful, beautiful day. And I will see you on the next one. Peace.